Hey y'all, my name is Beth Martinez and I am from Illinois, and I'm here to talk to you about getting out of your toxic story. So, this talk is adapted from a book that I read, and it's called Why Can't You Read My Mind? It is actually a book aimed at your marriage, but as I was reading it, I was struck by how much it relates to every aspect of our life, to all of our relationships, to our business, to our friendships, to our relationships, to parenting. So I wanted to share this with y'all. All right, sometimes we are waiting for something or someone to come along and make us happy. And in reality, all that you need is within you. When we're stuck in our toxic story, it's difficult to see a different reality. So I want to talk to you about changing your patterns. So this is going to improve your communication, it's going to help your problem solving, and it's going to enhance your relationships. Now, one of the things we have to talk about before we get into our toxic story is self-talk. Self-talk is something you're doing all the time. It's the running voice that you have talking to yourself out loud or in your head all of the time. So as you're going through your day and you're saying, I need to make sure I write milk on the list, that's self-talk. When you're going through and you're saying, I look so fat in these pants, that's self-talk. When you're saying, wow, I just, crushed that party, that was amazing, that's self-talk. When you say, I am never going to get another recruit, that is self-talk. So there's a continuum of self-talk. It goes from positive to negative to toxic. Positive self-talk is exactly what it sounds like. It's positive. It especially is positive even if the situation doesn't, need it to be positive. So negative self-talk is negative. It's not positive. It's not, saying you did a good job, but it's not toxic. So an example would be, a real life example would be, say you are walking through the mall and you fall down. Positive self-talk might say, oh my gosh, I am so fortunate that I, am just bruised. I could have really gotten hurt, and I can't believe how lucky I am. Negative self-talk is, I fell down in the middle of the mall. I really need to pay more attention to where I'm going because that was really embarrassing. Toxic self-talk is, I can't believe I fell down in the middle of the mall. What a loser I am. This is why nobody wants to be friends with me or hang out with me, is because I'm always embarrassing myself and them. So can you see the difference between toxic self-talk and negative self-talk? So a business example might be if you do a Facebook party and it doesn't go as well as you want. Positive self-talk might say, I know only 2 people were RSVP'd to the party, but I bet a lot of people are going to come, and it's going to be a lot of fun anyway, and this hostess is probably going to get a lot of bucks. Negative self-talk says, the party's tonight and only 2 people are RSVP'd. It sounds like I really need to buckle down and level with this girl and help her realize that we need to do better, or she's not going to get as many books as she wants. Toxic self-talk is saying, of course, another party with 2 RSVPs. It's because I'm terrible at this. I'm failing at my business, and this hostess doesn't want to listen to me, just like every other hostess doesn't want to listen to me. So the toxic self-talk is not actually helping you get better. Negative self-talk that becomes extreme, excessive, or distorted is going to make you feel bad about yourself, others, and sometimes the world. So that's the toxic thoughts. We all have the toxic thoughts. Sometimes we have them about ourselves, sometimes about our partners, sometimes about our lives. Our toxic story looks for ways to prove that it is true and to prove that it is a chronic condition. It changes how we feel. We feel tired, anxious, stressed, depressed. We perceive our toxic story as reality, and we act accordingly even when it isn't reality. Our toxic thoughts, in effect, change our reality. When I go through these 9 types of toxic thoughts, remember that these can be applied to any aspect of your life. So maybe you tend to have toxic thoughts about yourself, but not about your kids. Or maybe you tend to have toxic thoughts about your downline, but not about your upline. So this can apply throughout your whole life. Oh, I also want to point out the names of all these were from the book. So these are from the author. I think some of them are, a little cheesy, so I did not come up with these, and I just want to emphasize that. So toxic pattern number 1, the all or nothing trap. So when you're doing this alleviates stress when things don't make sense or they disappoint us. This distracts us from the real issues. And the truth is that each person and each situation is a continuum of strengths and weaknesses. So that's the first one. Number 2, catastrophic conclusions. When you say, my last Facebook party was a flop, I'm just not cut out for this business. You're exaggerating, you're catastrophizing. These are highly negative and fatalistic exaggerations. We may tend towards these on some subjects, but not on others. These actually block solutions, and they can lead to the very things that they fear. So when you're saying, my Facebook parties are terrible and nobody is going to want to do a party with me because they're awful, your attitude is not one that is going to make people want to do parties with you. So when you are in this toxic story, you are kind of making it a reality. So it's really important to identify these things as they're going on, because even if that's not the reality, your toxic story can make itself a reality. The should bomb. So you might say, my upline should be checking in with me more often. Even though I don't answer her calls, she should know I need her support. These, the shoulds can result from a sense of expectation or from a romanticized view of what things should be like. Label slinging. We use these to avoid how we really feel, and we tend to want to keep confirming these labels. So when you say, your new recruit is terrible, then you're just going to keep looking for things that she's doing that are terrible, that make you think that she's terrible, and you're not able to see beyond what she's doing. If you looked at it differently, if you said, oh, this girl, is going to need a lot of help to change, her natural reactions to things in order to be successful, but I am just the person for the job and I can't wait to take on this challenge. It's the same person and it's the same issues, but how you're framing it lets you actually solve the problem. Toxic thoughts, being stuck in your toxic story, it doesn't help you solve any problems. That's the problem with it. Number 5 is the blame game. When everything is someone else's fault, you avoid liability. Blame is a denial. So to get out of this, we can say, instead of who did it, we can try, what can we do about it? All right, number 6, emotional short circuits. This happens when you want to help, but you feel frustrated. You end up shutting down because you're feeling helpless. You feel like you have really dug into something and you're trying hard, but you don't see a way to help. And rather than continue to feel like you're flailing around, you just kind of shut down. All right, number 7, this one is based in anxiety and in a need for control. It is a vicious cycle like catastrophic conclusions, but it's not reality based. So the catastrophic conclusions is different than this. The overactive imagination is saying, yesterday I messaged my friend about hosting and she hasn't responded. She must hate me. The catastrophic conclusions is also a vicious cycle, but you're talking about things that aren't even going on. You're imagining things that are happening. So in catastrophic conclusions, you're basing things on what is happening, but taking it to the next level, where this is just pulling things out of thin air that you think are going terribly. The head game gamble. You are assuming another person's motivations. So you misinterpret the actions of other people and you are assuming a hidden agenda where there may or may not be one. Disillusionment doom. Your unrealistic expectations lead to you feeling let down. Toxic thoughts are based more on unrealistic expectations and distortions than on reality. They will trap you in a rigid mindset that weakens your ability to actually solve the problems. Everyone gets toxic thoughts, but you can learn to control them. When you're stuck in your toxic story, you can't see reality well enough to solve your problems. So we're going to talk now about what you do to get unstuck. So this is all straight from this book. They have the MAP plan. So mindfulness, alternatives, and practice. So we all need mindfulness. We can't survive on autopilot. Mindfulness, it means focusing on caring for yourself, for your thoughts, and how your thoughts affect your actions. Remember we talked about how your toxic thoughts can affect how you're acting and how you're presenting to the world, and that can affect your reality. So the thing that we can control is our thoughts, and being mindful, paying attention to those thoughts is the way to do it. And we're going to talk through all the steps on how to do that. Mindfulness step number 1, you want to listen to your toxic thoughts. So pay attention to what you're saying, and here's some strategies here that I'm not going to read off, but I will let you read. So you might need to think through these during quiet times. And the more you do this, hopefully you will start to be able to catch yourself as you're having the toxic thoughts. But for a while when you're starting off, you might need to write stuff down in your notebook and then think back through at the end of the day to look for those toxic thoughts. Mindfulness step 2. So here is a quick relaxation exercise that we're going to do. Pick a muscle group. Your shoulders, your thighs, your hands. You could be somewhere that you usually get tense or somewhere that seems easy to control. So concentrate on relaxing that muscle group. And then really notice what it feels like to relax it. Now tense it up and hold that tension for a few seconds. Then release it again. We all have certain areas of our body where we tend to hold our tension, and when our body is feeling our toxic thoughts, it feels tense. So noticing when you're feeling tense, when your body is feeling tense, can cue you to tune into your thoughts. So that's a mindfulness step for you. All right, mindfulness step 3. You want to determine your toxic triggers. Remember we talked about how, you may be having more toxic thoughts in certain situations. Maybe when you're dealing, with your mother-in-law, you tend to always have toxic thoughts. Or maybe it's if you're running, 3+ Facebook parties at once, maybe during those times. Or maybe it's at the end of the month when you're struggling to, get everything in at the last minute before the cutoff. So those situations are times when we're extra prone to toxic thoughts. Maybe it's when you're very emotionally invested. You're working on someone's promotion. Maybe it's when you're stressed or worried about something else. If you find yourself having the same problems over and over again, you may need to address something in you, something that you're doing that is contributing to those. Mindfulness step 4, remain calm. So when you're mindful, you can stay out of your toxic story. You can change your thoughts, and that can change your feelings. So an example of this is when you talk yourself out of buying something you can't afford. So you really want to do something, you really want to buy something, but you know that you can't afford it. So you can talk yourself out of doing that thing that you know that you can't do. Or when you are in public with your kids and they do something that if you were at home would set you over the edge and start you yelling, but you're in the middle of a restaurant, and so you don't do that. You speak, more calmly. So you can remain calm and practicing that, knowing that you can do it, the more you do it, the easier it is to do. All right, alternatives. So we've got the mindfulness, the alternatives, and the practice. So the alternatives. First, we want to understand that thoughts cause feelings, and that by changing your own flawed thinking, you can change how you feel. How do you prove that your toxic thoughts are wrong? So toxic thoughts have a confirmation bias, and they kind of set you into a tight spiral. The more you think about your toxic thoughts, the more that's all you can see is those toxic thoughts. If you feel like you're bad at hostess coaching, then that's all you're going to be able to see. And the times when you're good at hostess coaching, you're not going to notice those. You're going to gloss right over them. So then you're only going to see the times when you're bad at hostess coaching. And then you're just going to keep doing those things. And that's all you're going to see. And you're going to get worse and worse at your hostess coaching because you have in your mind that you're terrible at it. So you're just going to keep doing the things that get you tighter into the circle and then seeing only those things. And it's going to be confirming itself. You have to be the one to look for evidence to disprove your own toxic thoughts. Other people cannot talk you out of your toxic thoughts. You have to talk yourself out of it. And this can be really hard, but that's why practice is the last step. Sometimes we need to look really closely to tell what's real. So, some tips from the book. Come up with exceptions to your toxic story. Say you feel like you can't recruit anyone. If you've ever recruited anyone, ever, even if it was 5 years ago, you have an exception to that. If you never have recruited someone, then you maybe have had conversations where people have thought about joining your team. So look for exceptions to the toxic story. 3 is great, but the more you can come up with, the better it is. Pretend that you are an investigator for the defense. Take whatever your toxic thought is. Pretend that you are a private investigator hired by the opposite opinion, and you're being paid $50,000 to prove that toxic thought wrong. Then it makes it so much easier to be motivated to look for those things. Write down the positive statements that you have. So you are keeping those in mind, especially things that you tend to go toxic about regularly. Write down the positive statements. So you want to take your toxic thought, you want to find the evidence to the contrary, and you want to come up with an alternative thought. So, I'm terrible at booking parties might be your toxic thought. You want to find evidence to the contrary. Have you ever booked a party? Oh, you did a party last month, you're just struggling this month? Great. So every one of those parties that you did last month or 2 months ago or whatever is evidence to the contrary. Write those down. So your alternative thought might be, right now I'm struggling with booking parties. So I'm going to dive into the training and do better with booking, or I'm going to throw myself a booking blitz, or I'm going to call my leader or my upline leader and connect about getting better at booking. And then write down that alternative thought. I am getting better at booking. That's your alternative thought. So then you want to practice. Being mindful is a practice. You're remembering the big picture. There's easy times, there's hard times, and there's ongoing maintenance needed. Now, in the book, remember, it's about your marriage, and this is true about relationships, but it's also true about your business. Sometimes it's going to be really easy, sometimes it's going to be tough, but there's ongoing maintenance needed. If you're just coasting, then it's not going to be an easy time forever. Your attitude influences your actions, and it influences the actions of others. It takes time to fall into new habits. So when you practice empathy, you understand someone else's perspective, so you can identify with what they're feeling and why. And when you're empathetic, it is harder to be angry and it's harder to be toxic. So the less you have the spiral of toxic thoughts, the more open you are to empathy, so the easier it gets as you go along. So since we are practicing, I am going to show you an image that is not what it seems. And when you look at it, you want to see things one way, even though it's very clearly labeled a different way. This is what getting out of your toxic story is like. You want to see this as a butt, but it's not a butt. It's a person wearing a mask, and they are standing in profile, and it's a very muscular man, and he has a muscular shoulder, and he has a muscular pec, and he has a big beefy bicep, and that is the reality. But when we're in our toxic thoughts, it's hard for us to see that. So keep this in mind as you're doing your practice, and I hope that you can use the mindfulness, the alternatives, and the practice to get out of your toxic story. Thanks.